For decades, Israel and Iran fought a hidden war, spies, cyber attacks, and proxy battles. This weekend, that war exploded into the open. Israel struck near Isfahan, deep inside Iran, targeting a key airbase. It was a bold message. Israel can hit where it wants, when it wants. This was a direct response to Iran's unprecedented launch of over 300 drones and missiles at Israel just days before. Now, both sides are locked in a dangerous cycle of escalation, each strike raising the risk of a catastrophic miscalculation. The stakes are global. Iran's nuclear ambitions and Israel's vow to stop them mean the world is watching, hoping this conflict doesn't spiral out of control. The secret war is over. The world is on edge. Why does this matter to you? Because the Middle East is the heart of global energy. War here could choke oil supplies, spike prices, and send shockwaves through the world economy. But the human cost is even greater. Advanced militaries, civilian casualties, and a refugee crisis that could destabilize entire regions. This is a test for global diplomacy. If words fail, the world learns that force, not negotiation, rules. The next moves by leaders in Tehran, Jerusalem, and Washington could shape the century. When the world holds its breath, it's because the stakes are that high. What happened this weekend? Explosions rocked Isfahan, a city central to Iran's military and nuclear program. Israel didn't claim responsibility, but the message was clear. Your defenses aren't safe. The strike was precise, targeting air defenses near a nuclear facility. A warning, not a full assault. Iran downplayed the attack, calling it minor, giving itself room to avoid immediate retaliation. Both sides are playing a high-stakes game, showing strength while trying to avoid all-out war. The world saw a calculated move, not a reckless one, but the situation remains fragile. Behind the scenes, both militaries are preparing for what comes next. Israel's strike was a message to Iran and to the world. The US urged restraint, fearing a wider war, but Israel acted to show its independence and resolve. Now, Washington must balance support for Israel with efforts to prevent further escalation. Global leaders called for calm, terrified of a conflict that could engulf the region. Even a limited strike risks disaster if something goes wrong. The world is watching, hoping both sides step back from the brink. The message is clear: contain the fire or risk catastrophe. This isn't just a distant conflict, it affects you directly. Oil prices jumped after the Israeli strike, a reminder of how fragile global markets are. Higher fuel costs ripple through everything: food, goods, daily life. War here could trigger a humanitarian crisis, fuel extremism, and force nations to take sides. In our interconnected world, no conflict is truly local. The choices made now will shape economies, security, and lives everywhere. The world needs diplomacy and restraint before this crisis becomes everyone's disaster. To understand the conflict between Israel and Iran, we have to turn back the clock. It may surprise you to learn that these two nations were once allies. Before 1979, Iran was ruled by the Shah, who maintained close ties with Israel, sharing an interest in containing powerful Arab states. Everything changed with the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Ayatollah Khomeini came to power, establishing the Islamic Republic of Iran. This was a radical transformation of Iran's identity and foreign policy. Israel was branded the Little Satan, and the friendship evaporated, replaced by ideological hostility. Iran began championing the Palestinian cause, a direct challenge to Israel's existence. Opposing Israel became a tool for gaining influence across the Muslim world. This set the two nations on a collision course. The foundation of their relationship crumbled, replaced by suspicion and a disagreement over Israel's right to exist. This historical rupture is the deep wound from which tensions have grown. It explains why their rivalry is about identity and survival. Following the 1979 revolution, the conflict between Israel and Iran did not immediately become a direct state-on-state confrontation. Instead, it morphed into a shadow war, fought through proxies and covert operations. Iran began to build a network of allied militant groups across the region known as the Axis of Resistance. The most powerful of these is Hezbollah in Lebanon, situated right on Israel's northern border. Iran has armed, trained, and funded Hezbollah for decades, transforming it into a formidable force with a vast arsenal of rocket rockets and missiles aimed directly at Israeli cities. This provides Tehran with a way to strike Israel without using its own military, a form of deadly arms-length conflict. For Israel, this proxy network represents an existential threat. It's like having your enemy build armed fortresses all around your house. In addition to Hezbollah, Iran supports other groups hostile to Israel, including Hamas and Islamic Jihad in the Palestinian territories, as well as militias in Syria and Iraq. Israel has responded to this threat with its own covert war, conducting thousands of airstrikes in Syria to disrupt Iranian weapons shipments and target Iranian commanders. It has also been accused of carrying out assassinations of Iranian scientists and launching sophisticated cyber attacks, like the Stuxnet virus that damaged Iran's nuclear centrifuges. This tit-for-tat shadow war has been raging for years, a constant, low-level conflict just below the surface of all-out war. The most dangerous element fueling this rivalry is Iran's nuclear program. Tehran insists its program is for peaceful energy purposes only. However, its history of secrecy and obstruction with international inspectors has convinced Israel and many Western nations that Iran is secretly pursuing nuclear weapons. For Israel, an Iranian nuclear bomb is the ultimate red line. Israeli leaders believe that a nuclear-armed Iran, led by a regime that denies its right to exist, would pose an uncontainable threat to its survival. They fear that Iran would not be deterred by the principle of mutually assured destruction that kept the peace during the Cold War. This nuclear fear drives Israeli policy more than any other single factor. It's the reason Israel has repeatedly stated that all options, including military force, are on the table to prevent Iran from getting the bomb. This creates an incredibly tense standoff. Iran pushes forward with its uranium enrichment, getting closer and closer to the threshold of nuclear capability. In response, Israel intensifies its covert operations and issues increasingly stark warnings. The recent direct strikes are a product of this escalating tension. The shadow war is now threatening to burst into the light, precisely because the nuclear clock is ticking louder and louder, forcing both sides into more direct and dangerous confrontations. At its core, the conflict between Israel and Iran is a battle for the future of the Middle East. It's a clash between two vastly different visions for the region's identity and power structure. Iran, under its revolutionary leadership, seeks to establish itself as the dominant regional hegemon. It aims to export its model of Islamic governance and lead a broad coalition against American and Israeli influence. Its ultimate goal is to reshape the regional order, pushing out external powers and positioning Tehran at the center. This ambition is woven into the fabric of its national ideology and drives its support for proxy groups across the Arab world. Israel, on the other hand, sees itself as a bastion of democracy and Western values in a hostile neighborhood. Its primary goal is to ensure its own security and survival. From Israel's perspective, Iran's regional ambitions and its nuclear program are direct threats to that survival. Israel has worked for decades to build relationships with moderate Arab states, culminating in the Abraham Accords, which normalized relations with several nations. This represents a competing vision for the Middle East, one of integration, economic cooperation, and a shared security posture against common threats, namely Iran. These two opposing visions for the region's future are fundamentally incompatible. This clash is not just about military power, it's a profound ideological struggle. Iran's leadership frequently uses rhetoric that denies the Holocaust and calls for Israel's destruction. This is not seen by Israel as mere political posturing. It's taken as a literal statement of intent. For Israelis, who live with the historical trauma of persecution and genocide, such language reinforces their belief that the Iranian regime cannot be reasoned with and must be confronted with strength. This deep-seated distrust makes diplomatic solutions incredibly difficult, as each side views the other through a lens of existential threat and ideological animosity, leaving very little room for compromise. Therefore, the recent escalation is more than just a military exchange. It is the physical manifestation of this decades-long Cold War. Each drone, missile, and airstrike is a move in a much larger geopolitical chess game. Iran is testing Israel's resolve and alliances, seeking to prove that it can challenge the regional status quo. Israel is responding to restore its deterrence and send a clear message that its existence is non-negotiable, and that it will not allow Iran to achieve its nuclear or regional ambitions. The two nations are locked in a zero-sum game, where a victory for one side is perceived as a devastating loss for the other, pushing the entire region closer to a precipice. Nuclear weapons unleash destructive force by splitting atoms, fission, or forcing them together, fusion, releasing incomprehensible energy. A single bomb can obliterate a city. The aftermath is terrifying, creating intense radiation that contaminates everything for centuries. This weapon sits at the heart of current fears between Israel and Iran. 9 countries have nuclear weapons operating under mutually assured destruction, or MAD. The result of nuclear war would be the annihilation of both nations. The problem in the Middle East is that this balance doesn't fully apply yet. Iran is enriching uranium, close to building a bomb. The fear is that MAD might not apply to a regime that has called for Israel's destruction. This uncertainty makes the situation volatile and could shatter the region's stability. Nuclear escalation isn't a simple on or off switch. Think of it as a ladder. Each step moves closer to catastrophe. The bottom rungs involve threats, signaling the possibility of extreme force, even nuclear strikes. Next are military actions nearing the nuclear threshold. A strike near a nuclear facility is a significant step. It sends a message, forcing a response. Each step increases the risk of miscalculation. In the fog of war, things can go terribly wrong. A missile could hit a reactor, causing a meltdown. This could be misinterpreted as a deliberate nuclear attack, forcing retaliation. This is the nightmare scenario. The ladder is slippery, and a mistake could be catastrophic. Nuclear escalation is a process where the threat becomes a tool. The existence of these weapons casts a dark shadow. Every decision is weighed against climbing that ladder. The goal is to de-escalate. Danger of nuclear escalation isn't just about 2 countries. It's about the chain reaction it could set off across the globe. Imagine a line of dominoes. The first domino is an Iranian nuclear bomb. If Iran succeeds in building one, it is almost certain that its regional rivals, like Saudi Arabia and Turkey, would feel compelled to develop their own. They would not want to live under the shadow of a nuclear-armed Iran without having a deterrent of their own. This would trigger a nuclear arms race in one of the most volatile regions on Earth, a terrifying cascade where multiple nations rush to acquire the planet's most dangerous weapons. This domino effect would shatter the Global Non-Proliferation Treaty, the agreement that has for decades tried to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons. If countries in the Middle East begin to go nuclear, why would a nation in Asia or South America feel a need to abide by the rules? The entire system designed to contain these weapons could collapse. We would move from a world with 9 nuclear powers to one with a dozen, then 15, then more. With each new country that gets the bomb, the chances of one being used, either by accident, miscalculation, or deliberate act, increase exponentially. The world would become an infinitely more dangerous place. This is why the current crisis is not a distant problem. A nuclear escalation in the Middle East would have profound consequences for global security, including for the United States and Europe. It would force a recalculation of all military and diplomatic alliances. It could draw major world powers, like the United States, Russia, and China, deeper into the conflict as they seek to protect their own interests and allies in the region. A regional nuclear war would not stay regional. The radioactive fallout could spread across continents on wind currents, and the economic and political shockwaves would destabilize the entire global system, leading to a new and terrifying era of confrontation. This is the ultimate stake in the standoff between Israel and Iran. It is about preventing the first domino from falling. The calls for de-escalation are not just about stopping a conventional war. They are about stopping a potential future where nuclear weapons become common. It's about preventing a world where dozens of fingers are on dozens of nuclear buttons. The actions taken today, the diplomacy, the sanctions, the back-channel communications, are all aimed at containing this crisis before it triggers a chain reaction from which there is no return. The world is watching, because everyone understands that we are all part of the same line of dominoes. In the hours following the strikes, the world's reaction was swift. From every major capital, the message was the same: stop. Leaders across the globe issued public statements, all echoing a desperate plea for de-escalation. The United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres stated that the Middle East was on the brink. Beyond the halls of power, the public reaction was one of fear and anxiety. Across social media platforms, hashtags calling for peace trended worldwide. The world was reacting with a collective sense of dread. This is a clash between 2 of the region's most powerful militaries, with a nuclear dimension lurking in the background. The entire world has a stake in their decisions. Behind the scenes, a high-stakes diplomatic effort unfolds. It's a delicate balancing act. The United States, as Israel's ally, urges restraint while reaffirming security commitments. Backchannels send messages to Iran, warning of escalation consequences while signaling a path to de-escalation. Sanctions and economic pressure aim to change Tehran's behavior. China and Russia, with closer ties to Iran, seek to prevent a wider war. This complex web makes solutions challenging. Diplomacy seeks an off-ramp for both sides. A fragile de-escalation opportunity has emerged. Diplomats are trying to solidify this moment, building bridges over hostility. It's easy to see this as a faraway conflict, a headline that has little to do with our daily lives. But that is a dangerous misconception. In our deeply interconnected world, the shockwaves from a major war would reach every single one of us. The most immediate impact would be on your wallet. The Persian Gulf is a critical choke point for global oil supplies. A war would instantly send oil prices soaring, meaning higher prices at the gas pump and increased airfare. Higher energy costs would ripple through the entire global supply chain, fueling inflation. For businesses, it would mean higher operating costs, which could lead to hiring freezes or even layoffs. A war would, in effect, be a tax on the entire global economy, and we would all be paying it. Beyond the economy, there are growing concerns about our digital security. This conflict is also being fought in cyberspace. Iran has a history of launching cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. This could mean disruptions to services we rely on every day. This is why we should care and why we must pay attention. It's about our financial stability, our security, and the kind of world we want to live in. They are urgent attempts to prevent a crisis that would have tangible negative consequences for billions of people. Understanding how a distant fight can hit close to home is the first step in recognizing our shared interest in a peaceful resolution. So where do we go from here? The Middle East now stands at a perilous crossroads with two very different paths stretching into the future. The first path is de-escalation. Israel and Iran, having demonstrated their military capabilities, tacitly agree to step back. Diplomats are working to pave this path, making it a more permanent route away from all-out war and a return to a tense status quo. The second path is far darker and leads toward further attacks and retaliation. This is the path of escalation. One side could misinterpret the other's actions, triggering another round of strikes, pushing both nations up the escalation ladder. This path leads directly to a full-scale war, which would be catastrophic. The human cost would be immense, the economic fallout global, and the risk of miscalculation would become terrifyingly real, putting the world on edge. As we contemplate these two divergent futures, it is worth asking, what can history teach us about standoffs like this? The most famous example, of course, is the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, each with a full nuclear arsenal at its command, yet it was avoided. World War I is a powerful example of how a regional crisis can spiral out of control through miscalculations and rigid military plans. A single assassination in Sarajevo lit a fuse that led to a global catastrophe. So what does this mean for Israel and Iran today? Leaders must find a way to talk, even when they are sworn enemies. The current situation contains the ingredients for either outcome. We are living through a pivotal historical moment, hoping for wisdom to prevail over wrath. We began with a question. Are Israel and Iran heading for nuclear war? After walking through the crisis, the answer remains uncertain. We have seen the shadow war burst into the open, and both nations demonstrate a new willingness to launch direct attacks. The recent strikes have fundamentally altered the rules of engagement in the Middle East, pushing the region into a more volatile era. The path forward is not clear, and the choices made will have consequences for generations. This is the beginning of a new and deeply worrying chapter. With the nuclear dimension casting a darker shadow, the international community has responded with a unified call for restraint, a desperate attempt to pull both sides back from the precipice. As citizens of this interconnected world, we cannot afford to look away. Staying informed is our most essential tool. This is a story that is still being written. The future depends on the choices made by all of us who demand a world free from catastrophic war.